When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. I'm a psychedelic integration and transformation coach, breathwork facilitator, and an enthusiast of personal growth. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest today is a wonderful breathwork facilitator, Steph Magenta, and just calling her a breathwork facilitator, I don't think does her justice. She's a breathwork trainer, co-founder, and lead teacher at Integrative Breath, a certified alchemy of breath breathwork facilitator, shamanic practitioner, licensed body worker. She does Reiki, cold exposure. She's also a successful entrepreneur, having established several successful businesses in the health and well-being sector. And I want to include this as well because I remember she added this in last time we spoke. She's also a mother of 3 grown-up, very awesome children. So, Steph, welcome back to the podcast. It's so great to be talking with you again.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. A pleasure to be here again, and thank you for bringing my beautiful kids back in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, it was it, the if you're new to the podcast, Steph and I spoke about a year ago. I believe it was episode 17, and we're somewhere in the 60s at this point. So it's been a little bit of a journey and some time since we've spoke. But it's so great to have you back again. And I went back and re-listened to our conversation, which um, was just so lovely, I think is the word that I wanted to use. And I put myself back in the space that I was in recording that. And I remember feeling very grateful that you agreed to talk with me. I remember feeling like I was maybe shooting outside of my comfort zone by asking you. I thought, oh, Steph is so established. She has such a big presence on the web and in the breathwork community. And, I'm just going to ask and not be disappointed if she says no. And I was just so overjoyed and grateful that you were willing to talk and share such a beautiful conversation. So thank you again for being here.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. It's my pleasure talking about all things breath related, and ironically, I've had that very experience myself today, where something that I dared to ask for has come true, and I've gone, well, who knew? If you don't ask, it's not going to appear, and if you ask, you can risk a no. Anyway, thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, and that's I think that's such a good place maybe to dive in, is just having that courage to be willing to ask those questions, to be vulnerable and to be risky, and it
Mm.
doesn't always feel good, right?
No, it really doesn't. And the more I do this work and the older I get, the more I realize that actually much of the answers to the things that we're seeking is that willingness to become vulnerable once again, to because most of us have developed these strategies or armorings, known or unknown, conscious or subconscious, to keep us safe from feeling vulnerable again because that feels threatening or scary. So we're already talking about nervous system, which is the foundation of our work.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's such an important point, right? Because it really does zero in on the importance of the nervous system and how at the end of the day, we're just trying to feel safe.
Yeah.
Right? I was saying this yesterday working, at the treatment center, and I took them through a breathwork session, and then there were some questions, and I just kind of paused and said, everything that's happening, it just comes down to the nervous system feeling safe, and this through this practice, you're able to demonstrate to the nervous system, oh, I can do more than I thought I could.
Mm.
And everything that you're going through makes sense from that position of the nervous system just wanting to be safe. So we do all these things, right? Or we don't do these things to try to continue that safety and maybe not have awareness of it. But at the end of the day, it's like so much of this just boils down to wanting to feel safe.
Yeah. Wanting to feel safe, wanting a sense of belonging, wanting a sense of connection. I mean, who doesn't want to be loved and validated and seen and supported in the exactly as they are, because we're all at various stages on that journey, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, and then suddenly you find that you're going 4 steps forward and maybe just 1 step back by doing the
Yeah.
work. Or as you said, the vital point about it all is the practice, and that's what helps us build resilience. That's what helps us become more able to enter into those states of vulnerability, because we know how to resource ourselves first and foremost,
Yeah.
but not from that defended place of like, you've just got to do it all by yourself, or I may as well get on with myself, or nobody's there when you really need them. Those kind of faulty beliefs that we've picked up along the way, but understandable ones, by the way, just to acknowledge that. But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what would you say to somebody listening to this podcast and saying, and like being at the very, very beginning of that journey of like, well, everything that you're saying seems really overwhelming. Because I know last time we talked about some of your experience and the journey that your life has taken you. And um, it's so inspirational. Like you've come really, really far. You spoke about your, being an addiction and kind of overcoming that and stepping into your purpose. And
Mm.
um, I I think it's interesting to maybe think about that first step because so
Yeah.
many people are trying to take that first step. Like what would you say to that person?
I mean, what a great question. And it's quite a difficult one to answer, because I know that when I was considering making first steps, it wasn't like a really conscious belief of or desire to go, oh, I think I need to do some healing work or some inner work or anything like that. It came from desperation. It came from
Yeah.
the terrible, dark feelings of emerging from addiction and then being completely exposed to this world that obviously the addiction has been the self-soothing mechanism in the first place. So suddenly all those things are like, there's a physical vulnerability, there's a mental, emotional vulnerability. So, and at the same time, that's almost the compulsion. That's the place where it's like, I don't feel good. I'm either going to default back to addictive patterns and behaviors, or I'm going to try and find some way of finding something that gives me comfort. So I would say start small and don't think about where it is you're going to, it's like if you've got to climb Everest, you put one foot in front of the other. You don't look at the peak and think, oh my God, no, that's too big, that's too far, I'll never get there. Or if you do, you probably wouldn't even start. So it's like, I think really my only advice is to just honor yourself where you are, to feel all the feelings, be willing to feel them, to get the support to help you navigate them, and to just be honest with yourself about what it is, because as I say, oftentimes it comes from that desperation just not to feel that way anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The other thing that's coming up, or sort of maybe another way to say that desperation is surrender. Just being willing to give up and say like I can't do this anymore. There's got to be a different way. Um, and I can certainly
Yeah.
relate to that in my own journey as well, where I'm like I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was the turning point. So rather than it being the choice point, it was the turning point of, that surrender was the desperation of, I can't do this anymore. I really can't. And then most people will have that moment of realization. You could call it the initial awakening on some level or another, where they're like I'm either going to be dead, very, very sick, or, I don't know, something terrible is going to happen, that I need to sort this out. I got to find a way out. And I can remember when that moment was for me, and I had many smaller moments like that beforehand, but the addiction was stronger than the desperation, or the addiction was stronger than the sense of total surrender. But I do remember that final point of absolute surrender where I just went, I just can't do this anymore. And then it is that tiny step of like going, well, I don't know what the outcome's going to be and I don't know what's going to happen. And maybe if I had known, I wouldn't have done it, because there's a lot of painful stuff to navigate, as but the beauty, the joy, the prize, the gift at the end, the hero's journey, the treasure that you seek that comes to find you just in that willingness to be in that place of surrender and to make the changes is so worth it.
You're so right, and I'm only laughing because what you're saying feels really alive to me lately. I think we're acknowledging the challenges and the way that you put it, taking two steps forward and three or four steps back sometimes. And yet it's so important to say that it's always worth it. Like I've never, even in those really dark moments where I'm like, oh, why did I start this? It's like, nope, this is still so much better than where I was before. And yet there is sort of this humor um, in acknowledging that challenge. I've been I've been reading The Wisdom of No Escape by Pema Chodron as part of this program that I'm doing. And I came upon this story in there that I literally just made me, every time I think about it, I just laugh and laugh and laugh. And it's this story about this woman, this rich woman that says, I want enlightenment. And she starts searching for enlightenment and asking people, how do I get enlightened? And she finds this man that says, well, if you go up to the top of this mountain, there's this, you know, sage, this woman with wisdom, and she'll teach you how to, become enlightened. So the woman says, okay, I'm going to do that. And she finally, she makes her way through the mountains and finally finds this cave and goes into this cave. And there's this beautiful, graceful, woman all wearing all white. And she prostrates at her and says, teach me, I want enlightenment. And the woman says, are you sure? And
Mhm.
she says, yes, of course. Like, I want to know. And the way that it says in the book is, and the woman turns around and turns into this demon with this giant stick and starts chasing her, saying, now, now, now. And for the rest of her life, there's this demon chasing her, just saying, now, now, now. And it's just such a funny, metaphor for this journey to me, because it's like, yeah, once you start, you can't exactly stop.
Yeah.
You're just in the now.
Mm.
And um it makes me laugh, and I think it's relatable, and yet, like we're saying, it's totally worth
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
I love that story because, there is a tendency to think that maybe that kind of state of perceived enlightenment is something that is just like handed to us. We make a decision, we do the surrender, we make a decision. Oh, and here it is. And honestly, Jonathan, I am still learning about myself every single day. I'm still learning about where my shadows are. I'm still learning about what
Mhm.
triggers me. But I've got more skills and more resilience and more capacity to actually recognize that now and go, oh, there's that place that feels a little unsafe. How are we going to be with
Right.
this? Typically, we're going to breathe into it. We're going to sleep on it. We're not going to be reactive. We're going to accept that tomorrow things may look very different. And the old version of me would not have been able to do that because I'd have been in fight flight response immediately.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. The demon with the stick. It's kind of like, and not to put people off, because what are the options? The demon with the stick's already got you if you're in addiction. Let's
Right,
face it.
right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You said it, more resilient, more resourced, able to be less reactive. right? And more observant of, oh, here's my stories, here's my narratives, here's my shadows. And I think also more compassionate towards those parts as well, instead of, at least that's my goal, is like not being so judgmental or so much of, oh, I have to get rid of this part. I have to get rid of this
Mm,
thing within me that I don't like, to be able to change that to curiosity of like, well, what is this trying to keep me safe from,
yeah.
right? Because at the end of the day, that's the role
Mm,
of these protector parts, these shadow parts, is that at some point there was safety in that.
mm,
And being able to, either renegotiate that relationship or say thank you. And, I'm not a 5-year-old kid that needs protection anymore.
mm,
Thank you for your service. And I've got it from here.
yeah.
And being able to alchemize those parts.
Yeah, and I think when we find that compassion with ourselves for those parts, that's when we can truly find it with other people. Because,
Mm,
once we understand that we are all products of our upbringing and our programming, our conditioning, our, the messages, the beliefs, the traumas and the wounds of our caregivers and our primary influencers through life, um, and we understand how to start presencing that and forgiving that and understanding that, then we can recognize it in others, even if we don't know what their particular flavor or story is. It's just much easier to just hold that space of, I'm here and I'm listening. What do you
mm,
want to say? Oh, why do you believe that? Why do you think that? Oh, let's dive into there a little bit more. Sometimes with words, sometimes with breath, sometimes with something else completely.
yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that your breathwork practice is kind of continuing to evolve and change. How has that changed, like in the year since we've spoke?
Um, I think first and foremost, the main thing that is alive for me is really identifying the power of gentleness. Um, Not pushing people to places that they're not ready to go, because I, as a facilitator, might think that they should be able to go there, or that if only they could let themselves go there, this would change and that would change. So there's this line between gentle invitation and encouragement and crossing it into like pushing or kind of feeling like better than. And I think as I become more accustomed to the power of gentleness and what it can do, the I suppose the implications of integration, you talk about your work and how important that is, but we can't integrate what hasn't been recognized and felt and digested. And it takes time and space and I think a softer approach. So I am more about active listening, more about creating a space, more about honoring when somebody says, I'm not ready to go there, or I want to build safety. That's what I want first and foremost, whether it's with one-to-one clients or a group space. I want to build safety, but ironically, I don't use that term in my group spaces. I don't ever say to people, whether it is one-to-one or group, this is a safe space, because that's too generalizing. And I don't know whether it's going to be safe to them. And then people can get angry. Well, you said this was safe, and that person started yelling and screaming. That person was swearing. This was chaos. I was scared. Even in their own experience of a breathwork session, stuff can come to the surface where they suddenly feel extremely unsafe. So I will frame that beforehand and make sure that people are given as much information as possible to be able to hold and support themselves. I'll make sure that they have the capacity to resource themselves internally and externally. So all of that stuff's come in much more strongly. Um, and it continues to evolve, really. I'm kind of, I teach conscious connected breath work, but I think that there's this there's an importance to the kind of fundamentals of functional breathing and regulating the nervous system that comes in. And there's also recognizing the great mystery of what can happen in a connected breathwork session that goes beyond regulating the breath and the nervous system. But that's where it comes in, the importance of resource regulation, integration, etc., comes into play as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a rich subject.
Mm.
And I feel like for a lot of folks that have been doing breath work for a period of time, um, I personally am very grateful to hear that, what you're saying, because when I look on social media sometimes, I see Jamie Clements, the breath space, when he was on the podcast recently, he referred to it as catharsis porn.
Yeah. Oh my
Just
God.
seeing these these posts and this content of people having these huge cathartic releases, and this is the way that their services are being marketed. And not to say that that doesn't have a space in breath work, and not to say that I haven't had huge cathartic releases multiple times in breath work, but over time I've learned that it's much more important and to slow down and to do it in a safe manner, and everything that you're saying in terms of feeling, having a safe environment, and how we facilitate that, and how we frame that, and then also being resourced,
Mm.
you know not just, hey, let's throw you into the deep end of the pool with all the waves and the sharks, and then after an hour fish you out. Like, let's start in a much more supported and regulated way. So I'm personally very, very grateful to hear that, and I love that topic.
Yeah, I love that phrase that Jamie's coined there. I've had conversations with Jamie about some of this stuff before and others, because there is, and we mentioned in the talk before we got online, this exponential growth in breath work, and that the visibility of breath work, and therefore naturally it is raising more conversations about ethical practice, safety in practice. What is safety? Who's responsible for what? How am I going to do this? Because ultimately we're adults, so we want to
Right.
move away from that kind of nannying state. Everybody is free to have the experiences they're having. And like you, I have gained a huge amount in connected breathwork through catharsis. But it was process based. I was very aware that I was still in my body, that I could down regulate, up regulate, but the breath was what took me where I needed to go. And it wasn't that I was seeking that or forcing that. I think that's where the issues come in when you
Mm,
have this, as Jamie calls it, breathwork porn. Not only is it promoting all of the kind of cathartic states, but then clients are going in with expectations that they will have catharsis, that they're going to escape this body, this life, this day-to-day existence. And for me, any kind of practices like this are there to support us more in coming to terms with the extraordinary ordinariness of our day-to-day existence. That it's like, yeah, sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's gnarly, sometimes it's exquisite, sometimes it's disappointing, sometimes there's grief or anger or blah, 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 blah. But we have a library that we can understand things through, and we don't go in seeking that kind of escapist version of a reality. That I think that's what I see as well being damaging in those kind of it, and there's a growing number of them, but parallel to that, there's a growing number of people having conversations about good practice and what that means.
yeah. And the nervous system piece. Yeah, and I love that you brought up the ethics space of it as well, because you're right. We are going through this exponential growth, and there are people that, and this is my opinion, just are not taking the responsibility of taking people into these deeper states. very seriously. You know, personally, like I'm really cautious when somebody is like, oh, well, I could do a weekend training and then, hold these big groups. And, or, I've heard things from other people where it's like, well, you're just breathing. How intense could it be? And I'm like, you obviously haven't done very much breath work if you if you
Mm,
feel that way, um, because there is a real responsibility to this. And I would draw a parallel to back in another lifetime, I worked in the insurance industry. And so sometimes people would come to me and they'd say, well, I'm paying $500 a year for my insurance now, but this guy over here, he only wants to charge me $480. So, or, $200. So why should I stay with you? And I'd say, well, insurance is a weird thing. You don't discover how good or bad it is until you need it.
mm.
So like, could I lead a breathwork session after a weekend training? Sure. But am I equipped to support somebody should they start to have a distressful experience? Do I have the capacity to hold the space? Do I have the capacity to support them? Um,
Do I know what's even happening? Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right, right. So it's like it's one of those things where you're not going to discover
Mm.
the quality until it's too late, and I think that's the real risk of, maybe not taking that training and that experience into
Mm.
consideration. And I agree with you. It's our responsibility as facilitators to really be aware and conscious of
Yeah.
these things, and to be doing our own work, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not even that people are ignoring that, people just don't know that.
Yeah.
And and so really the responsibility again, it falls on the trainers because um if you have had a lot of exposure to breath work, then you will know about all of those states, and it isn't something to be taken lightly, in my opinion. And it's kind of there's a piece that I see where people, like you said, well, it's just breathing. So people come along and maybe they join a couple of one of our sessions online, or they go, oh, I'm going to do this with my friend because I know what I was doing and I was just opening my mouth, connecting the breath. And this actually happened in my experience. Somebody came to some of my free online Saturday sessions and then offered to do it for a friend and sent me an email and just said, oh my God, I don't know what happened. This person went into such a huge reaction, and the person had had a history of epilepsy and seizures and was
Hmm.
starting to go towards that part and was really impacted by it for quite a long time afterwards. And of course, the other person was their friend and felt terrible. And they said, I know now, I understand. I felt really humbled by what had happened, but that could have gone a lot worse because
Right.
there are real contraindications, there are real abreactions, there are people who need modified practices for very, very good and serious reasons. And if you go and you do a weekend training, you might skim through those, but there's no way you can have a full understanding.
Right.
It takes time to integrate the materials that we're being taught, and that requires humility and a willingness to be a beginner and to be a student. And, I've just done a TRE training, 3 modules of that, and I'm about to go into the case studies and everything else. And I had to go back to the beginning of the learning curve and just go, there's stuff in here that I don't know. There's stuff in here that I don't want to take people to until I do know it properly. There's stuff in here that I need to read. There's stuff in here that I need to learn. And so, I that's why governing bodies kind of, albeit in breath work, they are self-determined governing bodies, but they're there to uphold certain minimum standards of practice, certain minimum amounts of time that people will study. And I have heard some pretty well-known trainers in the field say things like, it only takes 4 days and then you just go out there and you do it and you learn on the job. Great. Maybe you're a maverick. Maybe you're a rebel. Maybe you don't like the authority that you perceive is in, these structured trainings that take place over a long time or cost more money. But ultimately, who's the person who's going to pay the price for that if somebody's learning on the job? It's the client,
Right.
and maybe the facilitator of somebody's ass gets sued.
Hmm.
Or maybe they're really deeply traumatized by what's happened and feel responsible because they weren't prepared and they didn't know what was happening. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my rant.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you bring up some really good points. There are serious medical contraindications to doing different types of breath work. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to completely disagree with that statement of like, well, you're going to learn by doing it, because there are things that come up, right? That's where you have to learn. But
Yeah.
you also study and go through that to be able to hold those spaces, right? Like I guess what's coming up for me is thinking about playing jazz, right? Like when you might go to a jazz club or see a jazz musician and they're just fully in their flow and creativity and jamming and just completely coming up with these intricate complex things on the spot. And you might say, well, okay, that's all I have to do is just, you know. But there's an incredible amount of discipline and learning and studying and practicing the fundamentals of that art form to be able to get to the place where you can be so free and, just so flowing in that expression.
Mm,
And so in the same way, I do think it's really important for us as facilitators to be studying and having that beginner's mind,
yeah.
like you mentioned, so that we can practice and put ourselves through those spaces, and therefore, have more capacity to
Mm,
to be in the moment when those things do come up.
nice metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah. I was really grateful that when I went through my program with neurodynamic breathwork, we studied the ethics of caring by Kylie Taylor.
Oh, that
And
keeps coming into conversations that I'm having at the moment.
oh, it's such an amazing book. I recommend it to so many people because it's literally a book about um the ethics of working with people in expanded states of consciousness, which breathwork is, which, acupuncture and body work and, EMDR, can be, as well as, the obvious of, um, working with psychedelics and plant medicine. So,
Mm.
um, yeah, it was a really helpful book for me, and it's something that I continue to recommend and have it on my list to go back and read again. Now that I have a couple of years of facilitation experience, I'm sure it'll be a good reminder and a good refresher. Because yeah, there's so much to learn there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that that book is coming to me because I believe that she worked with Stan Groff and came from
Hmm.
that field of practice, which obviously, his origins were in psychedelics and switched to breath work. So I'd be very interested to read that and see more, and we that's a huge part of our training. We have had historically a trainer who comes in who talks about the ethics of business and practice and supervision and the professional side of ethics. And now we're about to bring in another component, which is teaching about the intricacies and the subtleties of consent from a very experienced consent trainer who works with Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent. And I think they're really important considerations, because it's like it helps. I mean, I thought I knew what consent was until I took the Wheel of Consent training, 6 week training online, which I highly recommend. I was like, oh my gosh, I am a total novice at this. How is that
Mm.
possible? I've had years of experience in kind of sexual freedom advocacy and in that kind of arena and embodied autonomy. I've had years of experience in healing and touch based work and all the rest of it. And yet still, I find myself going, wow, there is so much that I don't know. And I think that's actually important to bring in, that in this work that it's really important that students can know that it's okay not to know everything and that it's okay to ask for the support they need and the help they need and to know also where their limits of knowledge and training are, because there's so many people that do that fake it till you make it kind of attitude. And then suddenly they're in the spotlight and they're like a deer in the headlights because they don't know how to answer a question or they haven't had that knowledge. And it's much more appropriate to go slowly and
Yeah.
refer out, or read the books, do the courses.
Absolutely. Yeah, having that beginner's mind, having that um, self-awareness of where our limitations are, and um, the courage to say, you know what, this is my boundary. This is outside of my realm, or I need to ask for help. I need to bring in another facilitator. Um,
Mm.
or just saying, that's a great question. Let me look into it and get back to you, rather than standing up here and pretending like I know the answer. So last time we spoke, there was something that stood out to me when I went back and listened to the conversation, and it was around support sort of after, in the how people can integrate their experiences, and getting support, and how sometimes the best way to support people is to give them the space to kind of discover on their own, not necessarily like giving them the answers, and um, self so closely guiding them.
Mm.
And I thought that was a really interesting topic, um, in the world that we're living in, right? Where um, it seems like there are a lot of people that their approach or their marketing is, I have the answers for you, right? And I think one thing that we agree on in terms of this work and breath work in general is that, oh, my job as a facilitator is not to give you the answers. It's to be there to witness and support you finding your own answers. Um, so I wondered if you could speak a little bit more
Mm.
about, you know, just being willing to sit in that discomfort of finding your own answers.
Mm. Yeah, there's so much to that question, Jonathan, because it's been a really big part of my journey and my learning with two significant teachers. One was through plant-based plant medicine exploration and journeying and healing. Um, and in an actual experience of that, when I didn't get the support that I wanted and didn't get the support that I was crying out for, without words, by the way, because I was deeply immersed in this journey, I went into all of the blame and projection, and there's nobody there for me, and you don't care because I'm this and I'm. And it was really interesting to have to meet that part of myself that had a belief that, oh, somebody doesn't come, somebody can't see me, somebody can't meet my needs. I'm not pretty enough or valuable enough or important enough or whatever the enough thing is. And that person said afterwards, we could see that you were in that space, and the most helpful, compassionate thing at that point was to let you meet that part so that you could meet that belief. So that was one example. And then the other one was in my shamanic training, where a similar thing happened, and I suppose I was uh, deferring my inner authority to somebody else wanting an answer to something that was within my experience. And the same can happen in counseling and psychotherapy. A good counselor or psychotherapist isn't going to tell you and interpret for you what your experience was in that moment. They'd be asking reflective questions like, well, how did you feel about that? What did you come to believe in that situation? Do you think that's a true belief? Why do you, and they start opening up. And I think our role, I've done that now in my work, because things do get activated. So, and we teach again our students this, like healthy boundaries. It's like, okay, how are you going to want people to reach out to you? Are you going to be clear that it's email only, that it's not Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Telegram, XYZ, Instagram? How do you want people to engage with you? because these days we've got people in multiple time zones, we've got people with multiple desires, needs, whatever, that might drop you a message at 11 o'clock at night and think that's okay. And if you haven't responded by 8 o'clock in the morning, you don't care. And it's like, and we're
Right.
all regulating our nervous systems, all the time. So I think sometimes for me, I will make it clear, I want you to reach me via email, and I actually say this, and I may not always reply. And and I say that on my, like, when I do my Saturday breathes, and I may not always respond, and if I don't, there's a very good reason for that. It could be personal, it could be what I'm hearing from you, and I might want to say give it a few more days, or maybe I'll do a very brief response rather than an in-depth one, because our job is to help people begin to identify what is happening within them. And if we're giving the answers, they're coming from our experience, they're coming from our assumptions, they're coming from our projections. There's a difference between that and then offering strong, clear, boundaried support. It might be, oh, okay, what are you needing here? Actually, that's not within my remit, or that's not within what we've agreed for these sessions. It's not going to be 24/7 ongoing support, for example. So I think being really clear about boundaries is a gift to people, not a penalization thing, as in, well, I don't really care, I'm just switching off. And there may well be people who don't really care and just switch off afterwards, by the way, you know. But it's like, who's it for? I always ask the question, who's it for? Am I meeting my need to be a good facilitator, or to be liked, or to gain approval? Or am I actually responding to something where I think, no, there is something here that needs attention? And also, it's hard for us as facilitators, because sometimes we have to accept that we cannot fix everything, that we might get things wrong, that maybe somebody comes to us and they've got a very serious, this happened again for me quite recently. Somebody reached me, although it was on Messenger, with a potentially quite serious request and set of circumstances. But there was just something about the way that it was phrased that was both assumptive about my time. There was no previous relationship there. There was no previous experience of our work together, but they'd just come in, and I could hear that this human being was reaching out and asking for help. My initial thing was, oh my gosh, I need to, maybe they've seen me on my platforms, and I should give a response that's like, pretty in depth and helpful. And then I had to tune in, and I also asked a very trusted friend, like, what would you do in these circumstances if you received a message that's quite strong? Not sharing the content of the message or who it was, but I came to the conclusion that it's like, no, I don't have to respond to everybody in the world who's suffering either. And in fact, I can't. And it's not healthy to do that. So, yeah, there are nuances in all of this. We've already covered quite a lot of them in the ethics. We've covered a lot of them in the catharsis. We've covered a lot of them in what training looks like and the implications for it. And I think none of this is an either or situation. It's all nuanced. It's all case by case to a great extent, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I guess what's coming up for me is like when people are in that space where they're sort of demanding, or like they feel like they need that from you, they are kind of in a black and white thinking, right? It's not quite nuanced. It's like, because it's coming from a wounded place
Mm,
that maybe they don't have the awareness of in that moment, it feels very black and white. It feels very binary of like, well, this is the reality of the situation. This is what's happening.
mm,
And so we're able to, and sometimes, I mean, I'm not excluding myself from that. And there's certainly situations where I've been able to go back and look at things that happened earlier on in life. Sometimes earlier on this week, or last year, and go, oh, wow, like I was looking at that from a particular narrative that seemed very crystallized and clear. And yet now, from where I'm standing, I can see the nuance in it. I
mm,
can see the complexity. And I guess for me, sometimes that's a really bitter pill to swallow. It's not the easiest lesson to learn to all of a sudden have that realization where the world opens up and that nuance comes and you're like, oh crap, I have, you know, haven't quite been looking at this in the right way.
Mm, mm.
But yeah, it's just a part of life, right?
Yeah, and we said before, it's like how we hold a compassionate boundary, not just
Yeah.
for the other person actually, but for ourselves.
Yes.
It's like we're not superhuman. We're not
Yeah.
people of endless resource, and everybody, we're walking side by side. We're holding each other up. We're giving each other suggestions. We're there for some people. We can't be there for all the people, for sure.
Yeah.
And everybody finds their kind of frequency, if you like. They find the person that's right for them, and there might be lots of reasons, and they find the time that is right for them. I'm very respectful of people who, or not very respectful, very what's the word, appreciative of people who maybe send an email and say, oh, hey Steph, I realize you're probably really busy, or, I hope you don't mind, but, this is what I'm sitting with at the moment. Have you got any suggestions? Shall I book some sessions? Have you got some space? If you haven't, do you know anywhere else? And I might say, thank you very much for acknowledging that. And I haven't got time at the moment, but here's a great facilitator, or here's somebody I recommend, or, blah, 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 blah. And again, it's like that's responsible practice, knowing when I'm at capacity and not just going to keep on taking more and more people because it brings more and more money.
Right, right. Yeah, there's something, I'll probably get this definition wrong, but I've read like boundaries are the space where I can love you while also loving myself.
Yeah.
And so if we don't have those boundaries for ourselves, if we're just giving and giving and giving, we're not really loving and respecting and honoring ourselves.
Well, that was the
Um,
essence of the wheel of consent training that I did, which was very much about this is my domain, this is your domain. I am responsible for and accountable for and have a right to the things in my domain, just as you do. If there's an overlapping bit where you come into relationship, whether that's personal, professional, or anything else, that's where your agreements live. And that really helped me kind of recognize that I have a right to what's in my domain. I have a right to say, no, I can't do that. No, I'm at capacity. No, I don't want to. And that person has a right to their feelings. What we don't have a right to is to go into blaming, projecting, shaming, kind of blah, 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 blah. But we're all on a journey to some part of that kind of understanding or other. But I think it's really helped me as a practitioner and a human and a person in relationship with other people in the world to actually be okay with having boundaries and saying no and being loving about that as well, but clear. And there are some people who will push against one's boundaries, and I push against other people's boundaries sometimes too, just to make it real.
sure.
I'm certainly not sitting
Yeah.
in some golden throne where I don't do any of this stuff. I do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's something it's something I wish that sometimes that I had more experience or came easier to me. And I also, have some gentleness for myself that it hasn't been modeled very well
Yeah.
throughout my entire life. And I haven't had the opportunity to practice it very well throughout a lot of my life. And therefore, there is some challenge and some discomfort from time to time. And I'm very grateful for the people in my life that are allowing me to practice and also to rewrite those narratives, because sometimes there's something that I'll say that feels really overwhelming in my body. It feels really threatening or scary or unsafe, I
Mm.
guess, to come back to the words that we've been using. And then when I say it and the sky doesn't fall in or that person doesn't leave me, to really start to, Freud is rolling in his grave at this point. But um it's a very transformative experience of, oh, wait, so again, to come back to what we were talking about in the beginning, like think a lot of our work is just demonstrating to the nervous system a new a new narrative of like, oh wait, this
Mm,
actually is safe. And there's only so much of that that can be done through talking about it.
mm,
It's something that we have to experience.
mm.
And therein lies the rub, right?
Yeah, yeah, because it's terrifying when we're little.
Right.
The thought
Yeah.
when we don't feel safe and those things are alive, it's terrifying because we don't have the resources, skills, and capacities to take care of ourselves, feed ourselves,
Yeah.
find shelter, etc., etc. We're entirely dependent on those who provide that for us. And we're still
Mm.
operating from that place a lot of the time. And so when we can start to come, as you say, and we can recognize that the sky hasn't fallen in and the people haven't left, or maybe some of them do sometimes, but actually we can still go, it's okay. It's okay. We're not that little anymore. My metaphor, I mean, I'm a runaway. I ran away from home when I was just turned 15. And I had to go back because at that age I wasn't ready or able to support myself and look after myself. And I ran away at 17 and I never went back. And so, there are times when we really are in that position where we're, not able to look after ourselves. And that kind of primal fear, I just said it, it can be terrifying when you're little.
Right.
And to be able to evolve and grow and learn and get support and develop understandings to feel that fear that activates, but to be able to really what we're doing is parenting ourselves. We're reparenting ourselves, aren't
Mm-hmm.
we? You said,
Yeah.
we often don't have great templates or models, and bless them. This came up on my Saturday Breathe. It's like when we can find compassion for those people who we think or maybe actually did do us wrong, because we
Mm-hmm.
recognize that had they been able to do anything different, they would have done. You know,
Right.
that's just the story. And then we come into acceptance and then we come into forgiveness eventually. And I don't think that that's something that can be rushed. I do think that's a process coming to forgiveness. It's not that pious Christian kind of forgiveness. Not to, I'm not being rude or dismissive of, Christianity or any particular religion, but mm, many aspects of spirituality have been distorted by religion rather than the spiritual aspects of that. And when we're told that you have to forgive everybody, um, regardless of what's happened, we're not having the opportunity to cycle through our true emotions. We're not having the opportunity to be authentic in our responses. And so I do think that this is a journey. It's not, I start here and I go there and that's where it ends. It's a continuum and it's an evolution, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to basically come back to that place of trust, simplicity, open-hearted responsiveness, and joy in life. What are we here for?
Yeah. Beautifully said. And there's also the nuance, in that journey, right? It's not just, oh, these uncomfortable or, bad is such a like a subjective label, but these horrible things that happened. But there's also things that I learned from those experiences that helped shape me and helped
Mm,
bring me into different parts of my life, and it's such a beautiful exploration of finding the grace
mm,
in your journey,
mm,
of alchemizing the things that maybe at one point were so seem so negative, or so overwhelming, and then finding beauty and finding jewels in that. And um I want to be really clear that I'm not trying to endorse bypassing,
yeah.
or on the other hand, validate any traumatic or disturbing experiences that anybody has had. um, I do really think that it's a personal journey, a personal experience.
Mm.
And I know when I've been in that place and, kind of trying to work through certain things, and somebody says, well, that happened for a reason, or, find the beauty in it. I just want to tell them where they can stick that.
Yeah.
But It is. It's a personal experience and a personal journey, and there within that journey there is the nuance.
Mm.
So I love that we've been able to touch on that nuance together. I'm curious, what is a good, and I know this is going to be variable, right? Because everybody is a little bit different, but for somebody that is brand new to breath work, what would you say is like a good sort of routine or practice to start doing, maybe on a weekly basis or a daily basis? Um, what are some good things that people can start to put into their life?
Well, I think on a daily basis, it's just becoming breath aware. So it's starting to notice when your breath becomes shallow and, up in the chest, and, oh, what's activated me? Am I feeling anxious? When you have less breath because maybe you've had a terrible night's sleep, maybe you're feeling a bit run down and you can't take a full breath. Maybe you've got into bad habits of breathing with your mouth open and not noticing, or, kind of learning how to retrain your breath. And then using some basic practices like, extended exhales or coherence breathing that start to slow down the breathing rate. We take a huge number of breaths every day, most of them not with conscious awareness. So sit and set a timer for a minute and count the number of breaths you do, just without changing anything. Just count them and then notice. And on average, that will be anywhere between 8 and 18. 18 probably for the people who are much more anxious or much more habituated into rapid breathing. And then see if you can intentionally slow that down as long as it's comfortable, Slow down the breath, set a timer again for a minute. Can I get this down from, say you're at the higher end of 16 or something, can I bring this down to 12 breaths a minute? Can I bring it down to 10 breaths a minute? I can quite easily now sit there as I've become used to regulating my breathing and placing a hand on my belly and noticing that my breath is primarily coming from my lower belly and is, expanding on the inhale and dropping back again on the exhale, knowing that the diaphragm's moving properly. And this all sounds a bit complex if you just want a basic thing, but, it's just like, well, just start by intentionally slowing down your breathing, starting to notice when it becomes rapid, starting to notice how you breathe, what your relationship is like with your breath. Because for me, that's been my game changer. It's not about doing loads and loads of open mouth connected breathing practices or attending a session every week or anything like that. It's learning on a day-to-day basis what the rhythm of my breath is and what impacts it. Because then when I get stressed, I can take a breath and slow down. And actually, it's helped me in things like this or, interview situations. It's like if I'm talking with somebody, I can feel when they're nervous because of the tenor of their breath.
Mm.
And one great, actually, this is ironic because I've just had a conversation with this gentleman today, but I believe, and I don't know how true this is, that Patrick McEwen was watching the founder of, Oxygen Advantage and Buteyko Clinic in International, was watching a Conor McGregor fight many years ago, like a boxing match, and knew that he
Uh-huh.
wasn't going to win because of his breathing. And
Uh-huh.
he's doing his interviews and he's watching his breathing, and it's like, and so many sports people now are coming into greater awareness of the importance of functional breathing as a way to
Yeah.
regulate the nervous system, as a way to bring on board that parasympathetic so that they can still be in their activated sympathetic, which they need to be if they're in combative spaces, but that they're grounded and solid and steady and clear. So they're actually balancing both sides of their nervous system at the same time. And that's what I want to be doing. I want to know that my sympathetic nervous system comes on board when I need it and not because it's accustomed to being constantly in fight, flight, adrenaline, stress responses. So there you go. That's where I'd start. Breath
I love it.
awareness.
I love it. I'm in full agreement. Yeah, because a well-regulated nervous system is able to have an appropriate response,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we're in a if we're in a MMA fight like Conor McGregor. We don't want to be, "Oh, I'm just going to meditate and, just
Yeah.
take a
Oh, where
break,
did that punch come from?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And on the flip side, I don't want to feel like I'm in an MMA fight when I sit down to try to meditate.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. I I I totally agree, and I often share this as well with people that I'm working with of like starting to have more awareness. And the first time I realized, like I remember very distinctly where I was and what was happening, and all of a sudden feeling like, why do I have the urge right now to breathe through my mouth? That's odd. And just stopping and kind of checking in.
Mm,
And it was like it was like the I could it was almost like the anxiety train was coming and I didn't hear it yet, but because I was able to cue into this feeling of why do I feel like breathing through my mouth? I was like, "Oh, there it comes." You know,
mm,
and was able to stop and take some deep breaths and really reconnect with the breath rather than all of a sudden finding myself in this anxious state.
mm,
um Almost similar to that, like that clarity that comes from mindfulness meditation where you like that split second before you react to something and you can kind of see the thought forming and you have the ability to say, oh, I'm just going to watch that go by instead of
yeah,
reacting to it.
mm.
It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Okay, so last question that I have is so in the we talked about my vital point being you have to practice, right? The meditation teacher I've been working with, the way that he puts it is words don't cook rice, which I think is a funny way to say it. But what would you say is your vital point at this moment in time? Like what's alive to you as the vital point?
It was the same actually. It's practice.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
nothing changes without practice. We don't get good at things without practicing things. You don't expect to
Mhm.
be a grand concert pianist without sitting down at your piano every day. You don't expect to become great at regulating your nervous system without understanding it, working with the things that help support you, learning how to settle it down. And I think practices, realizing actually, yeah, I used to go to a weekend workshop, do an intensive, come away going, oh my God, I'm going to change my whole life. And then all the old patterns would come in by the middle of the week after. And it's like, no, I need to find a way to sit down and breathe. I need to find a way to be still. I need to take some time for self care, and I need to identify what that is for me. So it's both practice, but it's coupled with self awareness. Do it how you do. I'm not a big journaler, but I do make notes of, oh yeah, when I did that, that feels good. I need more of that. This is what brings me joy. This is what makes me feel safe. This is what makes me feel comfortable. This is what lights me up. More of that, please. And the more self awareness we have, the more self mastery we can have. And the more we practice, the better we get.
Well, Steph, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast. Where should people go to learn about your offerings, or if they want to work with you and join you mentioned your Saturday breathwork sessions. I know you have all kinds of stuff happening.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the best place is either my website, which is stephmagenta.com, or my Instagram, which I'm pretty active on, which is at integrative breath. Maybe you could link those in the show notes.
I definitely
Yeah.
will.
Yeah. I
Absolutely.
mean, I have many more platforms. I've got YouTube and LinkedIn, and we have a breathwork training website, which is integrative-breath.com. But that's the first place, the first port of call, I think, because those links are all on there then.
Awesome. Yeah, I can I'm grateful that Steph has been so gracious with her time once again and can thoroughly and happily endorse. She has wonderful content on social media, lots of really instructive and valuable things about using the breath, um, getting into the cold water, staying active, staying positive, bringing in the shamanic elements into your life, and really so much more. So I think if you're not following her, go and do that after you listen to this podcast for sure.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. So thank you so much. So until next time, my friends, hope you really enjoyed this podcast as much as I've had talking with Steph. Leave us a comment, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And don't forget to continue to practice because that's a vital point. See you next time.